First agenda item today, call to order. We are here in the Lyle Shields meeting room for a board review hearing regarding new exemption requests for Carl Foundation properties or hospital for the properties located at Carlton Fields, as well as review of the Section 1510 affidavits, which were filed on behalf of Carl Foundation properties. Agenda item number 2 is a roll call. Elizabeth Bergner Patton. Paul Saylor.
Here.
Paula Bates. And myself, Zebo ZB. Also present today are various members of local taxing districts, representatives of Carl Foundation Properties, and Joel Fletcher, attorney for Board of Review. Third agenda item is the approval of the agenda.
I move to approve.
Motion carries. Fourth, is there any public participation here today?
Before public participation, I've been asked to make a statement on behalf of the Board of Review. My name is Joel Fletcher. As Mr. Zeeby just said, I represent the Board of Review. The purpose of today's hearing is threefold. One is to confirm valuations of the parcels at issue. The second is to receive any additional evidence or argument on a series of new exemption applications filed by Carl Foundation for properties commonly referred to as Carl at the Fields. The third is to receive any additional evidence or argument as to the current exempt status of previously exempted properties of the Carl Foundation, which are being reviewed with information submitted with annual Section 1510 affidavits. There are a few points the board would like to clarify before the proceedings begin. First, the Board of Review is not going to vote today on the exempt status of any parcel. That will be happening within the next few weeks, but the Board of Review would like time to consider the information provided today before it makes its decision. The Board of Review also wants additional time to review a decision issued just last week by the Circuit Court in Carl Foundation versus Cunningham Township. The members of the Board of Review were named as parties to that litigation. The decision in that case is not final and is subject to possible appeal. The parties to that litigation have previously presented conflicting views of the law that may reflect different views of its effect on the current matters before the Board of Review. The Board of Review and other county defendants have not finalized any decision on whether that ruling will be appealed by them, and they do not know if that decision will be appealed by any other defendant. That decision-making process is ongoing. In addition, there have been repeated arguments in a variety of fora by different taxpayers as to the scope of the Board of Review's authority to conduct an inquiry into the current exempt status of previously exempted parcels under Section 1510. The Board of Review is not going to offer any further comment on any of these issues today. Today, to be blunt, is not your chance to ask questions of the Board of Review about these matters, and my primary task here today is to remind you of that should that line of inquiry begin. The sole purpose of today's hearing is for you, the taxpayer, the taxing district, or other interested persons to present information to the Board of Review you would ask them to consider. You're free to make whatever presentation you want and to create whatever record you want, but the Board of Review would ask you not to limit your presentation to legal argument, but also present factual information as to the current exempt status of the parcels at issue. Thank you.
Do we have any public participation today? Forward is Mr. Flom with Carl Foundation.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Just for the record, this is under public participation, but you're intending this to be part of your presentation as to the issues presented in the agenda. Apologize for interrupting. Is the red light lit? There should be a button.
Now there is a red light lit.
Okay.
Okay, that's better. Thank you. I really see us more as, by us, I mean the Board of Review, the Champaign County, and the Carl Foundation, more as fellow travelers than anything else in this long saga and long journey relating to the controversy that's existed in this county for what, 18 years now almost. Obviously, the board and the county on the one hand and my client on the other have different views regarding the law. We have different views regarding sound public policy. And frankly, that's not something that any of us can control. The law is ultimately, of course, in the hands of the courts, and public policy is largely in the hands of the General Assembly. But I hope I've made it clear before, and I want to reiterate it today, that speaking both on behalf of myself and on behalf of my client, we recognize and respect that this board has always acted, and I know will always continue to act in accordance with your best judgment regarding what's in the public interest. And we may not share those same views, but we do recognize and respect where you're coming from, and I just want to say that publicly. So it's out there. We don't really see ourselves as adversaries. That's really why I prefer the fellow traveler metaphor. I think it more aptly captures what our roles are in this long-running saga, a saga that I hope is coming close to an end, but I guess we'll see about that. One thing that is clear, I think, as we all sit here this morning, is that Judge Rosenbaum's decision, coming after this many years of controversy, is certainly a watershed event in this long-running controversy. And the question really, I think for all of us, is where do we go from here? Certainly from the standpoint of the Carl Foundation, we hope this is the beginning of the end, that we can use this as an impetus to reach a resolution that puts this long-standing controversy behind all of us. I mean, obviously the Carl Foundation's not going anywhere. Champaign County's not going anywhere. We're both very important members of the community, and we need to get along. Hopefully we can see eye to eye more often in the future, and that this decision by the circuit court, this 145-page decision, I've been practicing law more than 40 years. It's the longest trial court decision I've ever seen. Obviously very carefully considered, coming on the heels of what's reported to be the longest trial in Champaign County history. It's obviously a very careful decision. We believe that it is consistent with more than a century of jurisprudence in our state. It's also consistent with the views of the other 101 counties in our state, as well as being consistent with the views of the Department of Revenue and the way in which it implements property tax exemptions in our state, and has for many years. So, we hopefully, I understand that in the past this board and its council have expressed the desire for guidance regarding what the law is. Well, you got 145 pages of guidance. It's a lot of guidance, and hopefully that's enough. But I realize that's probably not in any of our hands. But I do want to, directly express the hope that this is the beginning of the end. So where does it leave us here this morning? As Mr. Fletcher noted, there are really two primary subjects, I think, that with respect to the Carl Foundation. There's number one, what do we do about the current status, the exempt status of the Carl Foundation's properties? I don't mean to be presumptuous as to what this board may have been thinking in inviting comment and information, really, from the Carl Foundation regarding its continued entitlement to exemptions. My supposition, I may be wrong, is that you were hoping for a favorable ruling, and if you got a favorable ruling from Judge Rosenbaum, that you were going to leap on that and maybe use that as a justification for potentially putting the Carl Foundation's properties back on the tax rolls. Okay. Well, obviously that didn't happen, And given the fact that, we now have a ruling on the basis of a long trial that Carl Foundation was entitled to exemptions for 2005 through 2011, noting that there's no question, no one's really questioned, the entitlement to exemptions for 2012. No one really, I don't believe, can colorably question that there is no material distinction between entitlement to exemptions in 2011 or 2012 on the one hand and here today. So I would think and respectfully suggest that Judge Rosenbaum's decision, one thing that it clearly means is that whatever the board might have been hoping or considering about the current status, exempt status of the properties, that now is not the time, now less than ever is not the time to consider purporting to tax the properties as if they were not exempt. So I hope we can put that behind us. I would like to think indefinitely, forever, but certainly for tax year 2019, which is the only real issue in that respect that the board wishes, I believe, wishes to consider. With respect to the second main subject that's before the board today, we have 4 pending exemption applications that are before the board for your non-binding recommendation to the Illinois Department of Revenue. The 4 properties, they're not just Carl at the Fields. I think Mr. Fletcher might have misspoke a little bit about that, although it's not, it doesn't really make a difference. But the 4 properties, we've got the Sports Medicine Building is back for an encore. As you know, it's been before you once before. The Department of Revenue granted an exemption. The Champaign County has filed a request for a hearing. But the property, as I'm sure you know, some additional parking was added, and that resulted in a different PIN, so we've applied again. And so that's one of the properties that's before you. We've got the Curtis Clinic property is another property before you. And then there are 2, and so that's basically used for the provision of healthcare services, with the exempt percentage being requested relating to that being provided by physicians relating to the Carl Foundation. Then we've got 2 properties at Carl at the Fields that are before you. We've got the administration building and a medical office building, both of which relate to partial exemptions. So, we would certainly hope and urge that the Board of Review would provide a favorable recommendation to the Department of Revenue. The Department of Revenue will do its own thing, of course, whatever that might be. I would be interested in seeing your ultimate written recommendation. I'm not sure that you, frankly, have any legal obligation to send it to us, but as a courtesy, I'd certainly appreciate knowing what your thoughts are in that regard when you get to that point. But certainly leave that to your discretion whether or not you wish to send us a copy. But beyond that, I don't really have any additional information to provide. And I would welcome any questions that the board or Madam Supervisor may have, or for that matter, Mr. Fletcher. I always like responding to Mr. Fletcher's questions as well. We've been at this a long time, and it's a lot of mutual respect. I think it's mutual. I know it is on my part, and admiration between us.
I suspect this is just mostly a matter of housekeeping, but on the agenda was the valuation of the parcels. Is there any dispute as to the valuation of the parcels, wholly apart from the exempt status?
I can confirm that we do not dispute the valuation of the parcels at issue.
And I think for the board, I don't believe we have any questions for you offhand. I guess as a general matter, I'll ask if there's any other public participation before we go forward with the remaining agenda items.
Thank you.
My name is Fred Grosser. I'm an attorney. I represent the city of Urbana and Cunningham Township. I don't know if I qualify as public participation. We are interveners in this case. So as long as I'm talking, I'll say what I had to say now, which will be brief. First, with respect to Mr. Flaum's statement about the trial being the longest he's had, as long as I have, and I hope it never happens again. With respect to it, I mean, the longest decision, not the longest trial. I've been here since 1973, and in that year there was a 6-week trial prosecuted by the state's attorney's office. I wasn't involved in it, just set the record straight. I just have a few comments. I am not addressing anything in the city of Champaign or city of Champaign Township. I am here about the what you're going to do about the affidavit and the exempt status of the properties in Cunningham Township and the city of Urbana. I, of course, am aware of Judge Rosenbaum's decision. 145 pages, I read it all, took me 4 hours. That decision is not precedent in this case or in any other court case. You can take from it any reason you think you like, but the decision is not precedent. And if you wanted to look for something in the decision that is worthy of precedent, note that Judge Rosenbaum found that for 2004, Carl was not entitled to any exemption. And the significance of that is that each year stands on its own. Res judicata does not apply. They can be required. Any applicant for exemption or exemption holder can be required to litigate it every year. It is your decision to decide whether you believe they meet the qualifications for exemption in revenue year 2019, pay 2020. I have an exhibit, which I will distribute, and then I have a couple of comments to make about it. I've titled this City of Urbana, Cunningham Township, Exhibit Number 1. And Mr. Baum, a copy? The pages in this exhibit all come from the attachment to the affidavit that Mr. Pflaum filed, the Section 1510 affidavit. There were 2 documents. I put the first page of the document as the first page of this for the sole purpose of helping you identify what it is. Then there are several pages, and on those pages, or 4 pages. On those pages, I have underlined a few sentences in red and some numbers. So there are 5 or 6 sentences that I want to point to. The first page points to the total amount of charity care that they provided. I guess their latest figures were for 2018. So that's what they provided, and that's okay. The second page shows net patient service revenue for 2018, 2017. The next page at the bottom shows that about 69% for 2018, 66.2% for 2017. Was from Medicare, Medicaid, Blue Cross, and Blue Shield, so that much wasn't involved in charity care. And the last page shows the amount of financial assistance or charity in the chart at the bottom, and it's the same number. My calculation What they show is net patient service revenue and charity care at cost is it's 1.98%. On the last page, their calculations, obviously using different numbers somewhere, came to 2.86%. I don't think the difference in the percentages is significant for your purposes. I think the important point here, my important point, is that Illinois Supreme Court says that charity care must be the primary purpose, and I don't think 1.98% or 2.86% comes anywhere close to showing that it is the primary purpose. That is one of the essential requirements, one of the causative factors, and I think that should be an important consideration in deciding whatever you decide. I have no other comments unless you have a question of me.
The Board of Review doesn't have any further questions. Moving on, I think we've addressed everything that we intended to here today, but we do have, as a matter of record, 2 other agenda items remaining. The first being the new exemption requests. Are there any parties present that would like to make any statements regarding the new exemption requests?
With the understanding that Mr. Grosser and Mr. Flom's comments would be considered for that purpose.
Agenda item 7 regarding the review of the affidavits filed under section 15-10. Are there any further comments that would like to be made? Again, with the understanding that we have previously addressed those.
With the board's permission, I'd like to jump back to the valuation issue. Mr. Grosser, does the city of Urbana or Cunningham Township have any dispute as to the valuations assigned to any of the parcels at issue in either the 1510 affidavits or the new exemption applications?
Market value or assessed value, we have no comment.
Thank you.
And if there are no further comments, I believe we can call this meeting adjourned. Thank you.
Oh, you got time to come by my office?
Sure.
I don't know if we'll get there at the same time.